The League of Women Voters US is promoting a national effort to produce people-powered fair maps. This program, working toward fair maps, Redistricting 101, is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Idaho and will be presented by 3 League members today. I'm Kathy Dawes, a Moscow League member since 2017, where I've served on several committees and represented League on the Latah County Complete Count Committee for the census. Linda Engel, a member of League of Women Voters of Pocatello since 2016, is in the Idaho State University Math Department and teaches about the math behind fair redistricting. And Pam Ward, a Pocatello League member since 1995, serves as a director on the League of Women Voters of Idaho board. I will now turn the program over to Pam.
In the 1960s, many state leagues adopted positions on fair election processes. Last year, the U.S. League created the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign to advocate for fair political maps throughout our nation. Our objective today is to make Idaho citizens aware of how boundary choices can determine legislation that affects our lives. League's mission is to increase informed participation in public policy decisions. The process of changing district boundaries is called redistricting. Redistricting must be based on the 10-year census. Because populations change in 10 years, redistricting is needed to rebalance districts. Idaho will use the 2020 census data to change boundaries. This may change our political representation. Citizens will have the opportunity to give input on the new boundaries. The League provides criteria for the redistricting process so citizens have fair representation in their government. The current League position, promoting fair and effective representation, is stated on this slide. Although League and the U.S. Supreme Court prioritize equal population for fair representation, redistricting must be judged on these additional requirements: geographic contiguity, partisan fairness, preservation of communities of interest, respect for municipal and county boundaries, compactness, and competitiveness. This process must reject protection of incumbents, such as considering an incumbent's address, and preferential treatment for political party affiliation or voting history. How can we know if district boundaries are drawn fairly? Well, let's discuss gerrymandering and how to measure it. Gerrymandering is the manipulation of district boundaries to disadvantage a political party, racial minority, or ethnic group. Gerrymandering in the United States was used as early as 1788 to increase the power of a political party. The term gerrymander was originally coined in 1812 when Massachusetts Governor Gerry drew maps with one district resembling a salamander. Next, we're going to show a short video that will explain this concept clearly. While this video is focused on gerrymandering by one political party, we want to remind viewers that League does not support or oppose any candidate or any particular party.
In 2018, Americans voted for who would represent them in Congress. But in North Carolina, the election results were really weird. These squares represent all the voters in North Carolina. They were voting for these 13 seats in Congress. About half voted for Republicans, and about 48% voted for Democrats. So you might think of the 13 congressional seats, maybe Democrats would have won 6 seats, and Republicans would have won 7. But no. Democrats only won 3 of 13 seats, way less than half. This imbalance was because North Carolina's congressional districts had been gerrymandered. It means that these voters had been grouped into districts very strategically with the goal of benefiting one party. Gerrymandering has pretty much always happened in America. That's because every 10 years, the political districts are redrawn. And in most cases, those new lines get drawn by whoever holds power in state government at the time. That's what happened in 2010. Republicans won control of lots of state governments and redrew the political lines to favor themselves. And over the next few years, redistricting helped them hold on to almost all those states. This shifted the balance of power. And it turns out behind a lot of this was one guy.
Usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters.
This is Thomas Hofeller, the mapmaker who helped Republicans gerrymander districts over the last decade. When Hofeller died in 2018, his daughter found thousands of his emails and files, which she shared with activists. The files show that Tom Hofeller's fingerprints are all over the way America's political maps look today. But North Carolina was his masterpiece. And if you want to understand why gerrymandering is such a big problem in the US, that's a good place to start. The basics of gerrymandering are actually pretty simple. If you're a Republican trying to keep power, you want to do two things. First, pack as many Democratic voters as possible into a single district. If you have a district where almost everyone votes Democrat, that means almost half these votes are basically wasted. You can also crack big Democratic areas into separate districts where there are slightly more Republicans. So even though an area has a lot of Democratic votes, they would actually lose in this district and in this district. These are the two elements of classic gerrymandering, packing and cracking. And Hofeller employed these techniques masterfully in North Carolina. In 2011, he was hired to redraw the state's political lines, and for congressional districts, he came up with this map. Now I just want to focus in on District 12, this weird skinny shape. In order to make sense of this shape, we have to look at another map. This map shows the percentage of black people in each neighborhood. The bluer areas are where more black people live. Hofeller basically gathered up black people in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Charlotte and packed them into one district. So that's how District 12 happened. Hofeller also did this with North Carolina state representatives and state senators. For example, here are the state senate districts. Here, he packed Winston-Salem into one district, and then packed Greensboro into its own district. These new districts helped Republicans get a stranglehold on power in the North Carolina State House. And over the next few years, they were able to pass crucial legislation.
A strict new voter ID law in North Carolina.
Which bathrooms transgender individuals can use in North Carolina.
In 2016 and 2017, federal courts ruled that both of these maps were unconstitutional. They said what North Carolina Republicans did wasn't just gerrymandering, it was racial gerrymandering, done to deliberately dilute the political power of black people. The court said the Republicans in the North Carolina State House now had to redraw the lines without looking at racial demographics. So, they went back to Tom Hofeller. This time, Hofeller couldn't look at race. Instead, he looked at which areas voted for Democrats and which areas voted for Republicans. Instead of a racial gerrymander, it would be a partisan gerrymander. Here's that map, using data from 2014. The bluer an area, the more Democratic voters there are. Now, if you zoom in here to Greensboro, you can see one of the highest concentrations of Democratic voters in the state. Hofeller drew a congressional district line to crack this community in half. This meant Democrats here were now in the minority in their district, and Democrats here were also in the minority in their district. Hofeller employed these techniques all over the state to create North Carolina's new political districts. And the first big test for these new maps would be the 2018 election. Democrats were expected to turn out in droves.
Democrats are vying for a potential blue wave.
The wave that Republicans fear is going to wipe them out.
So, how did the maps do? For state representatives, Democrats got 51% of the vote. They only won 46% of seats. For state senate, they received half the vote and won just 42% of seats. And for Congress, you already know how that one turned out. Democrats won nearly half the votes, but won only 3 out of 13 seats. A year later in 2019, the Supreme Court weighed in. They said it was beyond their reach, that it wasn't their job to fix it. All of this raised an existential question. If Republicans could continue drawing the lines to stay in power, how could they ever be elected out of office? But the Supreme Court's ruling left open the possibility for state courts to rule on partisan gerrymandering. And in September 2019, that's exactly what North Carolina's Supreme Court did. The court found that partisan gerrymandering violated the state constitution. In the court's decision, it was Hofeler's files that helped prove that North Carolina Republicans drew these lines with the clear intention of benefiting themselves. Ultimately, the court said North Carolina Republicans had to redraw the state House and state Senate maps one more time. This new map, approved by North Carolina legislators, is much less biased toward one party, even though it took some extreme measures and nearly a decade to force politicians to draw a fair map. In the last few years, the courts in several states, like Florida and Pennsylvania, have made partisan gerrymandering much harder. And now that's also the case in North Carolina. Hofeler is gone now. But in other states across the country, many maps he helped draw are still in use. And while there's now a clearer strategy to challenge those maps in state courts, many voters are still effectively not choosing their representatives. It's like Hofeler said, the representatives are choosing the voters.
Of course, redistricting is democracy at work. Redistricting is like an election in reverse. It's a great event.
We just saw that gerrymandering can be measured by partisan bias. Both parties use gerrymandering to reduce the power of the other party. The video highlighted North Carolina. In 2016, Democratic candidates had 48% of the vote, but won only 23% of the seats in Congress. That same year, the opposite happened when Maryland Republican candidates received 35% of the vote, but won only 12.5% of the seats in Congress. Now we will apply the partisan bias method to Idaho. Let's look at Idaho. As in the video, we represented all Idaho voters by 100 squares on the top. Below, we see our senators and representatives totaling 105 legislators. In last year's presidential election, Idaho voters voted like this, with 33% Democrat and 64% Republican. These percentages have remained about the same since 2012. So one might think that the Idaho legislature would reflect this. That percentage break would look like this. But that is not what we find today. We find Democrats are represented by only 19 seats, or 18%, and Republicans have 86 seats, or 82%. One important consideration is that in the last election, 48 out of the 105 legislative races had no opposition to the Republican candidates. One other method to measure gerrymandering, compactness, uses the shape of individual districts. A circle is the most compact shape possible and has a compactness score of 1, which by this method is the most fair shape. Gerrymandering is more extreme when the compactness value is closer to 0. The C in our equation means compactness. Let's measure the compactness of a square district with 5 across and 5 down. The square has an area of 25 and a perimeter of 20. We see the compactness for a square is 0.79 as marked by the X on our number line. That's pretty good. A square district is not badly gerrymandered. Let's look at Idaho's districts using compactness values calculated by Dave's redistricting website. Remember, the lower the number, the less compact. Idaho's 35 districts have an average compactness of 0.4 as marked by the X on the number line.
Let's start with District 5, which has the best score of all Idaho districts with 0.71. It looks very much like the square with a similar compactness score as marked with the X. 10 of Idaho's districts have scores of 0.3 or less. We will look at 3 of them. Watch the shapes and their compactness scores. The circle on the state map shows the location of each district. We start with District 11 with a score of 0.2. District 34 has compactness 0.25, and District 26 near Twin Falls has a score of 0.28. Almost 1/3 of Idaho districts have extremely low compactness scores. Now Kathy will discuss the redistricting process in Idaho.
Idaho is currently divided into 2 congressional districts, giving us our 2 representatives in Congress, and 35 legislative districts, each with 1 senator and 2 representatives serving in the state legislature. That's why we have 105 in total, as mentioned earlier. Reapportionment is the term used to divide the total population equally among legislative and congressional districts. Redistricting is the redrawing of district boundary lines. How is the Reapportionment Commission determined? To assure bipartisanship, members are appointed by the 2 Senate leaders, the 2 House leaders, and party chairs. In addition, members cannot be an elected or appointed Idaho official and may not serve in the legislature for 5 years after serving on the commission. A majority of 4 of the 6 members must agree on the final boundary line drawing. Idaho is one of only a few states with a bipartisan commission separate from the legislature. The Idaho Constitution requires the following: equal populations between districts, geographic contiguity with districts containing more than 1 county or portion of a county connected by a state or federal highway, partisan fairness, preserving communities of interest, respecting municipal and county boundaries, and compactness. Redistricting must be accomplished in an open, unbiased manner, with citizen access at all levels and steps of the process. There should be timelines, full disclosure throughout the process, and public hearings with citizen participation that follow open meeting laws. The Idaho Constitution specifies the Commission's timeline to submit a new plan by September 1st. But this year, because the census was late, all dates have been pushed back. This is the tentative schedule from the Idaho Legislative Services Office. The final plan must be approved within 90 days after the Commission first convenes on September 20th. The public will be able to provide testimony and submit district maps between September 20th and December 19th. This year's Commission will have to deal with some notable changes in population since the last census. It's estimated that Idaho's population will have increased by about 220,000. Idaho analysts predict 7 counties increased in population, while the remaining 34 counties decreased. Some districts contain more than 1 county or portions of a county. Currently, each district has about 45,000 residents, but that will likely increase by several thousand. So, how can you get involved to make sure fair maps are drawn? Here are some steps you can take. Share this slideshow in your community with city council members, county commissioners, chambers of commerce, tribal councils, community leaders, and other elected officials. You can write letters and emails, make phone calls, submit letters to the editor of your local newspaper, and share your actions on social media. The public is invited to testify at hearings. Because this process can be daunting, The League will provide training sessions to help citizens prepare and practice their testimony. At hearings, people may read a prepared statement, tell their personal story, provide a sample map, and end with a request regarding a specific boundary. The League website will list dates for Reapportionment Commission hearings and have links to testimony trainings. If you want to include an actual map as part of your testimony, davesredistricting.org is a website where you can draw your own district maps for Idaho. Training videos will be available on the League website.
We don't know the methods and tools past reapportionment committees use to draw district maps, but we do realize how difficult it is to ensure that we have fair districts in a state with many geographic features and limited roadways. We hope you are inspired to become involved in the upcoming redistricting process in order to ensure fair and effective representation in Idaho. In closing, we want to share with you this clever font called Gerry, which was created using the shapes of actual congressional districts that formed the alphabet from A to Z. Using this very appropriate font, we want to say thank you. This recorded workshop is available on the Idaho League's website, lwvid.org. Thank you for joining us today.